I teach this class in person at a couple schools around Charlotte, and each semester there's at least one student who misses a test for a number of reasons. Maybe he or she is sick, or is an athlete and was traveling. So I didn't want to post a video of the answers before everyone was done. That wouldn't make sense. So I think what I'll do is later on, once I have all the tests with me and graded, I'll put the correct answers online so you can check your work. And if you have any questions, then you can message me individually about a specific question. Does that make sense? So with that said, what I think we'll do is start learning about structured query language. Now, you've probably heard me say SQL or structured query language or databases 100 times since the beginning of the semester. And finally, we'll see what SQL is and how it really is Excel on steroids, right? So with that said, let's learn about databases. Now, believe it or not, a database is not a spreadsheet. And I know I probably screwed up several times just in me jibber-jabbing that look at the Excel spreadsheet and then I may use it interchangeably with the word database. But databases are actually something unique unto themselves. And you can think of a database as a filing cabinet, and it holds different types of files, including tables. Tables sounds weird, but tables in your database are essentially your spreadsheet. It's your information that you're going to be pulling from. Now they also hold structural information, like your column headers, your formats, your character types, etc. And they hold your views or queries. And these are your findings, sort of like a filter or a pivot table in Excel. So your tables, your structural information, and your views and queries make up a database. Now, what is structured query language? Otherwise, it's known as SQL or SQL. And what this is, it's a coding language that grabs information from your data and allows you to manipulate that information or the data itself. And SQL can pull specific records. Remember, a long time ago in the first class, I gave that hypothetical example of a bridge collapsing, and I used SQL to find the specific bridge. So I'm grabbing a specific record. SQL also lets you aggregate records, essentially do math. It lets you group records like a pivot table would. And what is really powerful with SQL, it lets you join records. And I think I gave this example before, that say I had a table or a spreadsheet of every bus driver in the state of North Carolina, and I had another table or another spreadsheet of every person who's been convicted of child molestation in North Carolina. And the fields were name, age, date of birth, city, etc. in both fields, or in both databases. Well, what SQL would do is it would let me join those two databases, the school bus driver database and the convicted child molester database, to see who, if anyone, pops up in the same data. Now that could be scary, but also a story. You know, is someone driving a school bus that is also a registered child molester? So that's what SQL allows you to do, join tables. And the results of your joins are called views, or a lot of times they're called queries. And these are the code that you write to find information in your data. But like any other language, words and punctuation matter in SQL. If you screw up a word or if you screw up a punctuation, you're going to get an error. And in some ways, errors are great, because rather than just spitting out information, SQL is telling you, no, I'm not going to give you anything, and I'm definitely not going to give you the wrong information, right? So errors are good, they're frustrating, but they're good, and you have to remember that like in any language, words and punctuation matter. So we'll be really strict about that. Now the database manager that we'll be using is called DB Browser for SQLite. Now it's an open source database manager that lets you import CSV files or text files. So why are we using DB Browser? Because there's a number of different selections out there, really powerful ones too. Well, first of all, it's free. It's an open source that we can grab right from the internet. 2, it's easily downloadable. Some database managers take hours to download. 3, it can handle a ton of records, millions and millions of records, and still perform pretty fast. And 4, it's compatible with Macs and with PCs. I used to teach this class in a program called Microsoft Access. It's part of your Microsoft Office package, but Access is not compatible with Macs. So you'd have to go to a computer lab to use Access, and I didn't want that for you all. So if you haven't already, please go to the website listed and download DB Browser for your SQLite. Hopefully you already did, but if you haven't already, push pause and download it. And in case you need some help, here's a YouTube video of how to download it. And feel free to contact Campus IT.
In our class, we're going to be using SQLite databases. To create a database, SQLite database that is, we need to take and download this DB Browser for SQLite. So we're going to go over here and click on this link right here. You see the download link right there. You notice here we got a bunch of windows. We got a Mac, okay, and then there's other ones for other Linux and things like that too. I'm going to use my 64-bit Windows here, and I'm going to take and download that. Wait for it. Once it's downloaded, you go ahead and click on it like that, and say yes. And if you wait for just a moment here, pops up like this. And we're going to say go ahead and continue. I'm just going to do the defaults, which probably will be okay for most computers. Next, and install. Yeah, it takes a little bit. Mine gets stuck. The green line gets stuck right about here, but after a little bit, it should install and you should be all ready. Go ahead and run it just like this. And that's what DB Browser looks like for SQLite.
If you haven't already, go online and download the CSV file called Charlotte Nonprofits and open it up. And I'll do that right now. And it should look familiar to you because this is the first file that we opened up when we learned Excel earlier in the year. And here's the data, just to review it one more time before we import it into SQLite. So this information is a list of the 50 highest paid nonprofit leaders in the Charlotte area. And it starts with the column header with the person's name. It tells the organization type, whether it's a country club or Duke University, the person's title, the source where we got the information from, and Form 990s, just for your information, are IRS forms. And then it also gives us total compensation in dollars. See, it's 390 with the currency sign in front of it, and that's going to be important down the road. So this is a file that we're going to be importing into SQLite. It's a relatively straightforward and simple file, so I wanted to start off small before we take any real big steps with the database manager. Now once you download DB Browser for SQLite, you should get an icon sort of like this on your desktop, and if you don't have it on your desktop, then in your search bar search for SQLite or DB Browser and it should pop up. Now DB Browser is a really fast and powerful tool, but it does have a couple hiccups, and I wanted to go over them today just to get them out of the way so we don't have to learn them on the fly when we're really crunching data. So do me a favor and open DB Browser. And I always get this little message and I simply click off it. So you should get a screen that sort of looks like this. You may have a couple boxes on the right hand side over here and down below over here. We'll learn just to click off them because 9 times out of 10 we won't need those boxes. So if you get them, feel free to click off them. Now you'll also notice that it's blank right here, right? It's just like an Excel spreadsheet that we have no data in. And what do you need to do to get data in the spreadsheet? You need to import it. And we, for this class anyway, will be importing from CSV files. So go to File, Import, and look at that. Table from CSV is grayed out. I can't import a CSV file right yet. And this is sort of one of the hiccups that is different from a simple Excel file, right? So what you have to do for a DB browser and for most powerful SQL database managers is you first have to create a new database. Now think about it. The database is your filing cabinet. And your spreadsheet you're going to put into your filing cabinet. Your spreadsheet is also called a table in database terms. So we have to actually have a filing cabinet before we put a table in there. Does that sort of make sense? So before you import a CSV file, go to New Database and navigate to wherever you're going to store your data. In this case, like usual, I'd store it into your data folder with today's date on it. So in a separate folder with today's date. So I'm navigating to the folder I want it, and this is where I'm going to store it. And in this case, call it Charlotte_nonprofits. Charlotte_nonprofits. Okay? Click Save. And you get this screen. So I created my database. My database is called Charlotte Nonprofits. What do I want my table to be called? I'm going to call it again, Charlotte Nonprofits. There we go. Now you don't have to do anything else right yet. Just click Cancel and your data will be there. So now we have our database created, and you can look at the top of your screen and see I have it called Charlotte_nonprofits.db.database. And just to make sure you know where you saved it, it also gives you the location of the file that you saved in case you need to revert back to it. So we have our database created, but look, our filing cabinet is empty. It has no tables, no indices, no views, no triggers. But now at least we can import a CSV file. So go back to File and go to Import, and you see how now we can grab a table from CSV file. So click that and navigate to the Charlotte Nonprofits CSV file that you downloaded earlier today. Here it is, and click Open. And this should look familiar, right? So we have the table name, Charlotte Nonprofits. We have a field separator that's saying it's comma delimited. SQL is being smart and it's saying the column names are in the first line. Check. You can notice if I can uncheck or check it. It's giving quotes as a character, which is great. So all I have to do is go down and click OK. And it says import complete. Okay. So it created a table right here called Charlotte Nonprofits, which is great. Remember, I still have one little hiccup to show you though. So don't really pay attention to what I'm going to do because it's going to be over your head, but I'll try to get my point across if that makes sense. First, let's look at what else we have. If you do the drop down to Charlotte Nonprofits, these should look familiar. we have the name, we have the organization, we have the organization type, title, source, and total compensation. Right? All of our column headers have imported. And this is what the hiccup that I want to show you right here. Total compensation. Does anyone see what might be wrong with that field? Total compensation. Look here. SQLite imported it as a text field. See, it's a text. And even though I can go up and modify the table and change it to an integer or a number, it's too late. For DB Browser, it's too late. You have to change, or you have to modify the field format or the field type as you import. And here's the thing that I want to show you just to sort of prove my point. Now this is going to be a little bit over your head for the first couple of classes, but that's alright. I'm going to go to SQL, execute SQL. And pay no attention to what I'm about to do, but I'm going to write a code that tries to add up all of our total compensation. So 390,000 plus 470,000 all the way down the road. I'm going to write a code that does that. Okay, here's my code. It's saying select and then sum all my total compensation, rename it as a field called compensation from my table known as Charlotte Nonprofits. Now the code's right, but watch when I run it. I get compensation 0. And I get rows returned in 5 seconds, so my query ran, but something's wrong. 0 compensation. So that's how you know when you know you did it right. It gives you that sort of warning that 0 came back as a total, which obviously isn't right. So you have to go and import it again and import it as the total compensation as an integer. Okay, so that's the one hiccup when you import data into SQLite. We need to know the format of the columns before we import, because although you can change the format name, the actual data will not change behind it. So it's sort of a pain, definitely not like Excel, but it's one thing that we'll have to pay attention to as we move forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this data. Do not want to save it. And I'm going to go into my folder where I created that database, and here it is, Charlotte Nonprofits. It's a database file, and I'm going to delete that too. It did, yes, permanently deleted. It did me no good because the total compensation was a text file. Now I'm going to import the data correctly as a number or an integer for the total compensation. But even then, there's another step that we have to do. So let's fix that darn CSV file and change the total compensation into a number. So I'm opening it back up. I'm going to get rid of that little message. I'm going to spread out the fields just so we can see better. And total compensation, I don't want that general. I want it as a number, and I want to get rid of the 2 decimal points. So there we are. I'm going to save it as a number. Okay. Exit out again and go back to DB Browser. Okay. Now remember I said you can't change the format in DB Browser. So what I have to do is not only change it in the CSV file, comma, separated value file, but I also have to essentially create a database shell for my data. You know, And what that is going to let me do is correct the format before I even bring the data into SQLite. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to create a new data set. I'm going to navigate to where I want it, just like before, and just like before, I'm going to call it Charlotte Nonprofits. Just repeating the steps that I did last time. And I'm going to call the table again, Charlotte Nonprofits, just like last time. Now this is where things change. I have to create a shell for my data. And what do I mean by a shell? Well, essentially I mean I'm going to manually add all the column names or the field names here and the format here, and I'm going to give a little bit more information over here. I'm just going to create a blank data set, so when I import it, it's going to import into my blank data set. So the first field name I'm going to add was name. Remember, it was the CEO's or the person's name who's making the money, and of course a name is a text. NN means not null. In other words, are all those records there? And yeah, we didn't have any blank. PK means primary key, and what that is, it's a unique ID it's a standalone part of the data. You know, there's only one name, one person is only listed once in this data set. So I'm going to click primary key, and you should really only have one primary key per table. AI is auto increment. You can ignore that for our purposes. And U is unique. So I'm going to click that because names are unique. Now I'm going to add another field. And the second field was organization. If I can spell it right. And again, that was a text, and there were no nulls. Add another field, organization type with an underscore, and that was a text. See how I'm assigning a format as we go? Title, text, source, text, and the final one, the one that caused us problems last time, total compensation. I'm going to keep it as an integer. I'm going to mark all these as not nulls. And you can see this is the code down here that SQLite is writing to import my data. So I have my fields, name, organization, organization type, title, source, and total compensation, and all but total compensation are text. Now click OK. Okay, now I have one table in my data set, but let's look at that table. I'm going to highlight it, I'm going to click Browse Data. There it is. It's just an empty shell for my data. We haven't imported anything yet. But you can see my headers are there, and my format is saved as I created it. Okay, go back to database structure, and now I can go File, Import, Table from CSV file. Now I can grab Charlotte Nonprofits, click Open. Does this look familiar for a third time? Charlotte Nonprofits, we got the column names as a header, it's comma separated. I can scroll down and click OK. This says that a table called Charlotte Nonprofits already exists. Do I want to replace it with my imported data? Yes, I do. And import complete. Okay. Now, when I go to Browse Data, look at that. It's imported, and it looks better because I got rid of the $ signs at least. But let's write that same SQL query to see if we get a correct number rather than simply 0 compensation dollars. So here's my SQL query. And you'll learn to write queries like this, but this is saying select and then sum total compensation. So sum that field and rename it compensation, and from the table called Charlotte Nonprofits. Then if you click on this little arrow, the play button, that runs your query. And there we go. Finally, I didn't get 0, but I did get a number, and it looks like $19.9 million. So that was the hiccup that I wanted to show you about importing data from a CSV file into SQLite. That it's really important that we have the formatting down prior to adding the data into our database. And not only that, we often have to create a new database before importing a CSV file. A couple little wonky things compared to Excel, but once you get the hang of it, they'll be really easy, and you can, once you import the data, you'll have it there to run queries from. I'm going to save this query as total compensation. Click OK, and it's saved as a view successfully. I had 3 goals for you today. 1, to get you to download SQLite. 2, to show you that little hiccup with importing data. And 3, to go over this navigation bar up top, right here. So let's do that. We'll start with the database structure. Now the database structure is essentially the information behind our data. You can see that we have our tables listed here, and tables sort of look like a worksheet icon, and you can have dozens and dozens of tables. You also have your views, and this is the view that I just wrote, or the query that I just wrote. I labeled it total compensation, and views have that green icon. And I can double click on a view and find out more information, find out the SQL that I wrote to get it. Right? I can also delete a table from this structure, and I can create a new table. So that's the database structure. That's the information behind our data. Then if you click on Browse Data, you get the actual database. And you'll recognize this from looking at the CSV file. We have name, organization, organization type, title, source, and total compensation. And you scroll down, we have 50 total records. All right, so this is our data. And SQLite actually has a nifty tool. We probably won't use it all that much, but it has a filter tool. So if I just want to filter out Rhett, right down here, I can type in his name and it pops up. But we're more interested in writing the structured query language to query our information. Now, Browse Data also has this drop-down box, and right now I'm on the table called Charlotte Nonprofits, but I can also navigate to whatever queries or views that I write, and I can jump to total compensation, the 19.9 million. I can jump back to Charlotte Nonprofits. Okay, and I can also switch to my execute SQL, and this is where we'll be writing all of our code. And the SQL is we can write our code and then we can save it and move on to the next. So the 3 main navigation bar tools that we'll use: database structure, has the background information that we need for our data. The browse data has our data itself and our queries in the drop-down, and execute SQL has the blank forms where we'll be writing the code. And you can see SQL sort of like Excel. This is going to get confusing by saying the two, but it highlights some keywords in our data, like select and sum and from. So it's highlighting specific words of my query because, like I said, it's a programming language. Words and punctuation, like parentheses, are important. So I know this was a fast lesson, but I really just wanted to give you a taste for SQLite. We're going to be doing those imports dozens of times, and you'll get the hang of it. So a few highlights from importing data. First, check your CSV file for formatting information. Does it have numbers? Does it have dates, etc.? And then in SQLite, create a new database. Name that database, and you usually want to name it after the file that you're going to import. We imported a text file called Charlotte Nonprofits. That's what I call the database. Make sure you select where you want your data to be saved. And typically, we've been doing this for the entire class, save it in a specific folder. And then you can go back and do File, Import from CSV. But you can't import from CSV without actually creating a new database, without creating that filing cabinet that's going to hold your information. Other things. Often, as we learned today, you want to create a blank shell for your imported data. And you'll fill out that shell with the names of the fields and the format for the fields, and you'll also add secondary information like not nulls, primary keys, which are those specific unique values that you have, and other values that may be unique throughout your data. So there are some highlights with importing data into SQLite. Hopefully you downloaded SQLite, and hopefully you got a taste of at least what it looks like. And next class we'll dive in, we'll play around with some data, and we'll begin to learn some structured query language. Well, hopefully I wasn't too confusing. Hopefully you're not too overwhelmed. But trust me, this will be fun, and you'll get it.